taking control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Slaves to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Reveal your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
let your experience begin right now. From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride as we are live on Spaced Out Radio.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Space Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, and it's good to have you along for the ride wherever you are on this great planet we call Earth. So we are live right here in Uncle Jimbo's cabin, right here in the Great White North on this Thursday night, early Friday morning if you're on the East Coast. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio. We do this thing every night of the week as we rock in and out of every show, thanks to our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses. Yes, Bumblefoot is the official sound of SOR. Hey, if you're a social media junkie, you can follow me on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Find us on TuneIn, download our shows from iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. Hey, if you want to take part in the show, we don't do phone calls, but you will have to sign into one of the chat rooms, either on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, on the UPRN chat room, and on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club, or if you're on Twitter, just go to hashtag Spaced Out Radio. I will get to your questions in there as well. If you head to our website, make sure you sign up for the SOR Space Travelers Club. It equates to about $5 a month, and with that, your name gets entered into monthly prize draws. You get access to private group interviews and so much more. Hey, we're going to give you a heck of a lot more than just access to our archives. While on our website, check out our latest blogs, Eric Markham's SOR Space Wire for your latest and weird news. And if you've had an experience you can't explain, we want to hear about it. Just fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Mike Schmidt is ready to investigate for you. We want to thank everyone listening in on our affiliate, the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and their listeners from over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you along for the ride. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Take the time to visit freedomslips.com and donate today. In the history of the United States, there has ever only been one unsolved skyjacking. The event happened in the state of Washington on November 24th, 1971. That's when the world of mystery learned about a man called D.B. Cooper. Cooper hijacked a Boeing 727 en route to Seattle from Portland and demanded a ransom and a parachute for the passengers on the plane. On the way back towards Portland, the man known as D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane, never to be seen again. And to this day, no one knows whatever happened to him. Recently, D.B. Cooper was back in the news. On July 8th of this year, the FBI announced that it was suspending active investigation of the Cooper case, citing a need to focus its investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. In other words, they gave up. Tonight, we are going to have the opportunity to discuss D.B. Cooper, and the case with Bruce A. Smith from the Mountain News in Washington State. Bruce has followed the Cooper case for decades as one of the top expert researchers in this field, and he will be with us for the entire 3-hour show from Washington State. We welcome in Bruce A. Smith. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio. How are you?
I'm good, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
It is absolutely fantastic to have you on. And I got to tell you, my friend, literally when we started this show 2 years ago, I made a list of everything that I wanted to talk about on this show in regards to topics, just throwing things on paper. And D.B. Cooper was on that list. Man, is it hard to find someone to talk about it. I am so glad and so excited to have you with us and our audience around the world and on social media. So really, thank you for taking your time to do it for us.
My pleasure. In fact, I would recommend to your listeners that if they kind of want to follow along as we talk, they can visit the Mountain News, which is an online news magazine. Just Google Mountain News D.B. Cooper, and you'll get to my my magazine. And there are about 60 articles on D.B. Cooper and plenty of pictures. And so you can see the different suspects. You can see what the crew members look like nowadays, particularly Tina Mucklow. And you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff, and so you can peruse through that. Also, too, if anybody wants to go to Amazon and buy my book, you can. You can get a digital copy, which has got tons of pictures in it too, and you know, really begin to, as we drill into some of the topics, you might want to read along with us and send us some more questions and help steer the conversation. And the title of the book is D.B. Cooper and the FBI, a case study of America's only unsolved skyjacking. And I am the only author that I'm aware of that is writing about the D.B. Cooper that is not pushing a particular suspect or a particular scenario. I am an investigative journalist, and I hope that I have written. My intention was to write an objective, comprehensive treatise on the D.B. Cooper case.
And I recommend my audience go and do that right now, because you're going to want to follow up. Once again, Google Mountain News, D.B. Cooper. It is all over there. I have it up myself, because tonight we're going to get into this wild and extraordinary topic. But before we start getting into it, Bruce, I always like my audience to get to know the guest a little bit. What got you so involved in this case? What thrills you about it?
There's a number of things. One is it's a whodunit, and it's about as big a whodunit as you can get into, and not get overwhelmed by the enormity. For instance, you want to check out the assassination of JFK? Great, but it's going to overwhelm you. You want to check out 9/11? Is it an inside job, or whatever happened, and how did that all happen, and how come the jet fighters weren't in the air, and all that? That story is going to overwhelm you. But the D.B. Cooper case touches a number of important issues for our times, like how law enforcement truly functions, and are we getting the straight story, and why do people lie, and who's putting what kind of slant or what kind of spin on the story, and things like that. The D.B. Cooper case is big enough to be really fascinating for a really long time and have plenty of mysteries, but you can wrap your head around it, and it's not going to blow you out of the water. Now, how I got into the case, I'm 67 years old, and I'm a kind of like a retired newspaper reporter. I was writing for a local newspaper in 2008, and my editor said one day, we've got an air show up at the local Pierce County Airport up in Puyallup. The pictures, there's going to be plenty of good-looking planes up there and stuff, and restored vintage stuff, and so, make lots of good pictures for the front page. Why don't you go up and write us a story? And I said, okay. And, excuse me. So I went up there and I met a pilot. I need to take a sip of water here. I met a pilot by the name of Ron Foreman, and he had just restored a beautiful plane from the 1930s called the Fairchild 24. And when I was a kid, I had built a model of the Fairchild 24, and I had never seen one in real before. So I'm looking at the plane, and I'm going, oh, my God, this is really pretty. There's even a little bud vase in the back seat with a rose sticking out of it. Ron sees me admiring his plane. He walks over. We start talking about the plane and building models and stuff like that. It's a really hot day. He says, why don't we get into the shade and, would you like a nice cold Coke? And I said, you betcha. So we sit down in his lawn chairs, and we're schmoozing back and forth about this vintage plane. And it looks something like what, what's his name? Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. It's a single-wing plane. And on the ground, underneath the wing, I saw this book that said D.B. Cooper, something, legend, something, death. And I go, hey, Ron, you into D.B. Cooper? And he goes, hell, I just wrote that book with my wife. I said, son of a gun. So we spent the rest of the day talking about his book. And his book is called The Legend of D.B. Cooper, Death by Natural Causes. And it's a remarkable story about a remarkable person by the name of Barb Dayton, who in 1978 confessed to being D.B. Cooper. And Ron was personal friends with her. She also confessed later in her night of big confessions that she was the first person to have had a sex change operation in Washington State. So Ron and his wife, Pat, were rocked by two major revelations, and ever since then, they've been keeping kind of tabs on the friend's name is Barb Dayton. They were keeping on what little notes on whatever Barb said about how she did the skyjacking as D.B. Cooper, and then researching what she said about the sex change operation. And long story short, their book is about Barb Dayton and her confession, and about how she said she did the hijacking. And it's a fascinating story, and it seems from Barb's point of view, is what she was saying was that she did the skyjacking to prove to herself that she still had cojones. Now, Ron and Pat truly believe their friend, and they believe their research, and the book is excellently researched. It's a great read, but I don't think Barb is D.B. Cooper. But that got me started. What really got me started in the hours that Ron and Pat were telling me about their friend Barb, what really popped up for me was all of the inconsistencies and bad behavior by FBI agents. They weren't returning Ron and Pat's phone calls. They weren't returning emails. They just were obstructionist, and they didn't believe them at any point of view, at any turn. And I said to myself, doesn't the FBI want to research somebody who has confessed to being D.B. Cooper? Are you kidding me? And so the red flags coming, of inconsistency and perhaps cover-up really got my attention, and that's what got me going. Now, my editors did not want a story about FBI cover-ups or sex change operations, but they did want to know about local authors writing about D.B. Cooper, because I'm in D.B. Cooper country. D.B. Cooper flew right over our houses here on his getaway flight. So everybody knows D.B. Cooper. Everybody wants to talk about D.B. Cooper, and everybody's got a theory. And so my editors were all for that. And over the next couple months, I wrote 5 stories about Ron and Pat Foreman and their suspect, Barb Dayton. Along the way, National Geographic got involved. They started filming. They were going to make a documentary. And then at the last minute, they cut out all of the Barb Dayton material. So that further whetted my appetite about what the heck is going on here. And that's when I really began to research seriously, and found there's a lot to the story. There's a lot of different stuff going on. There's a lot of different agendas, a lot of political pressures on the case. FBI is doing a lot of stuff that doesn't seem really good, police work, and the question is why. So here we are. And I wrote my book in response. And I've been working on this book and the case for the last 8 years, over 8 years, and still going strong. I have a third edition that's going to be coming out at the beginning of the next year.
Bruce, has it become an addiction for you? Because
No.
there is so much information out there, and even though the case is almost 50 years old, there's still new info still arising?
There's information arising. What captures my attention is bad police work. And why can't the FBI find D.B. Cooper? That's the number one thing. And civil justice and criminal justice is very big on my list of important things in life to research. And Cooper's not the only story. We could talk for weeks about different cases. We could talk about Flight 800. We could talk about the Amanda Knox case. It's endless, And a lot of other journalists are beginning to really dig into some of these pretty hotsy-totsy stuff, like Netflix did that long documentary on the Stephen Avery case up in Wisconsin, and that, just filled with all kinds of real shady and questionable police activity. So it's those kinds of things that really keep me going.
What does your family say about all this information that they're gathering? Are they just as intrigued as you, or are they like, okay, have we had enough of this yet?
My ex in New York, who I'm on very good terms with, she's kind of like my best buddy. She's like, enough already with the D.B. Cooper stuff. But my mother, who is 92, can't see. She has macular degeneration and is legally blind. And whenever I see her, and I'll be seeing her for Christmas next week, she wants me to read her stories. And so I read her from my book, and she loves being a sleuth, being an investigator. And she is like, well, you should do this and you should do that. And I said, yeah, Mom, wait, hang on a second. It's in the next chapter. She goes, okay. So my mother's really into it. So that, so it's quite variable. But I would say most people do not share my passion and do not share some of my concerns. I have a lot of concerns. Not only has nothing been found of the skyjacking. When D.B. Cooper jumped out of his plane, not only has he never been seen again, but nothing else from the hijacking has ever been found, except for about $6,000 worth of the $20 bills from the ransom that was discovered on a beach about 10 years later, and nobody knows how the money got there or when. So there's really two mysteries. There's the hijacking, and then there's the money. And nobody can explain any of it. And there's a lot of internal mysteries. For instance, the number one witness to the case is one of the flight attendants who was kept on board as a hostage. And she spent 5 hours with D.B. Cooper, and her name is Tina Mucklow. And she went into hiding for 30 years. And she spent part of that time in a cloistered convent as a nun. And then when she came out, she basically disappeared herself and didn't talk to anybody for the next 20 years. So, and the question is why? And I and other people went to look for her. We finally found her. And there's a whole chapter on how we've actually found her and what we did to go find her. And when I did, she just slammed the door in my face. And it's like, whoa, how come you got so angry, girl? So, there's mysteries like that.
Well, let's kick this off here. Take us back to November of 1971. Break it down for what happened for us.
Okay, the details of the case are this. The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, so it's a Wednesday, a middle-aged gentleman comes up to the the Northwest Orient ticket counter in the Portland Airport in Portland, Oregon, and buys a ticket to fly to Seattle. And back in 1971, it cost you $20, and he paid in cash. And the ticket agent asked him for his name. He said, "I'm Dan Cooper. Back in 1971, you didn't have to show any ID or anything like that, no credit cards, no driver's license or anything like that. And there was no baggage inspection. There were no metal detectors. You could walk onto a plane with anything you wanted. You could bring an Uzi, and no one would say anything." And so he said his name was Dan Cooper, and that's what he signed in as, and not DB. He signed in as Dan, and so got on the plane, and he asked the ticket agent, he says, "That's a 727, right?" He says, "Yeah." And but it's running a little late. It's going to be in about a half hour. And when the plane came in, now the 727 was a very unusual plane for its day, and it was a very small plane. It was much smaller than the 707, which was the major commercial jetliner for that time. The 727 only had 100 seats on it and was designed to go to small airports. And it had an internal staircase system that passengers could use to get in and out of the airplane. Because since it was flying to small airports, many of those smaller airports did not have jetways. Back in the 70s, jetways were just being installed, and they were only being put in initially in the major airports like Los Angeles Airport or JFK in New York and things like that. And in Portland, they didn't have jetways, and so they were using the staircase. And so the plane takes off 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Cooper is sitting in the back seat, and he hands, as they're taxiing down the runway, he turns to the stewardess who's sitting in a jump seat right behind him in the galley, and he hands her a note, and the flight attendant thinks he's trying to make a pass at her, so she just puts the note in her pocket and smiles and then looks away. And once they take off, Cooper turns back and says, "Miss, I think you need to look at that note." She opens it up, and it says, "I'm hijacking the airplane. I have a bomb. I want you to sit next to me. This is not a joke." So she comes in, and she begins to freak out. And at that point, Tina also sees, she's also back there, and she sees what's going on and sees that Florence is having a tough time of things and makes an intervention, intercedes, reads the note, and she takes Florence's place. And Florence takes the note, goes up to the cockpit, and tells the captain that they're being hijacked. Tina calls on the intercom, which they call the interphone, and confirms that. The captain gets so rattled. There's 3 guys in the cockpit. There's the captain flying the plane. There's the co-pilot sitting next to him in the right-hand seat, and then there's a flight engineer behind them who's handling all the engineering and the engine controls and the weather and communications and stuff like that. Well, William Scotty, is flying the plane, and he gets so rattled, he gets all kind of shaky. So Bill has to take over. Bill Radicek was the co-pilot. Takes over the flying, and Scotty gets himself calmed down. And the 3 of them decide, they better start calling some people. So they call headquarters back in Minneapolis, Northwest Orient headquarters, and they get patched into the FBI up in Seattle, and flight control, the FAA, and air traffic controllers up in Seattle. And it's pretty quickly determined that the flight is only going to take 30 minutes. And Cooper has a number of demands, and now Tina starts calling in the demands. And Cooper wants $200,000 in cash, and he wants 4 parachutes. He wants 2 front, and he wants 2 back. And that means he wants 2 main parachutes that are worn on somebody's back, and those tend to be larger parachutes. And then he wants 2 front chutes, and those are known as reserve chutes. They're smaller chutes, and they're lighter, and they sit on somebody's torso or abdomen. And he also wants a knapsack. He wants the money in a knapsack. And he doesn't want the plane to land until everything's at SeaTac Airport. So they need to circle around Seattle for about 2 hours while the FBI rounds everything up. They get everything, and the plane is cleared to land. It lands about 5:30, and it parks at the end of a runway. And the money is exchanged. The passengers are released as part of the deal. Fuel trucks come in, and they start to refuel the plane, and then Tina gets the parachutes. And so in the whole process, there's an exchange of passengers, the money and parachutes come on board, and fuel starts going on to the plane. As it turns out, the FBI's point of view is we're not going to take this lightly. We don't negotiate with terrorists or skyjackers and things like that. And they're looking for an armed confrontation. They're ready for a shootout. As it turns out, back in those days, there was a lot of skyjacking going on. There was several hundred skyjackings that had taken place over the previous few years. There's about one average, one skyjacking every 2 weeks somewhere in the United States. The vast majority of them were political. Some of them involved money. It was like fly me to Cuba, but I want $100 million too. Or fly me to Cuba and I want all the Supreme Court justices to come with me. I mean, so some of the demands were pretty wacky and wild. This is the first time that someone says, I'm taking your airplane, I want some money, give me some parachutes, and you get your people back. This was a pretty straightforward extortion crime. And the FBI's perspective was over my dead body. Now, the airline's perspective was, in terms of skyjackings, it's a lot cheaper to fly this guy wherever he wants to go. At the end of the day, we're going to get our plane back with no holes in it, and that's what we like. We'll have a lot of grumpy passengers, but we'll give them a voucher for another flight some other time in the future, and all is good. And that's how most of these skyjackings were handled. From time to time, the FBI would storm the plane, have a shootout, shoot out the tires and things like that, and that caused a lot of aggravation. There were some deaths. There was a famous incident called 58 November, and the pilot was killed, the skyjacker was killed, the passenger was killed, and the FBI didn't look too good. And so that was the history of things when D.B. Cooper did his skyjacking. And the airlines had a very uneven relationship with the FBI. The airlines saw the FBI as cowboys. That was the word that they used. And it was like, cooler heads have to prevail here. And so we'll tell the FBI only what we want them to know when we want them to know it. So the FBI and the airlines were not on the same page about how to handle this. So what the FBI did was they began to monkey around with the fuel trucks. And they started telling the airlines that the fuel, there's problems, and they couldn't fuel up the plane. They were trying to stall for time. Cooper began to tell them a lot about what was going on and revealed that he knew a lot more about the plane than the pilots, or he had an advanced level of knowledge. First thing that really tipped his hand was he told the pilots, what's wrong with the fuel trucks? We should be filled up by now. And the pilots told him what the FBI was telling him, and he got pretty antsy. And so the pilots made an intervention, and as Bill Radachek told me, he said, I raised my voice with the FBI. I laid down the law, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And so eventually Radachek was able to convince the FBI to fill up the plane and keep the hijacker cool, calm, and collected, which was the Northwest Orient's perspective. It's like whatever the skyjacker wants, he's going to get. We just want our plane back. So the plane's on the ground for about 2.5 hours. There's a lot of monkeying around with all of these exchanges and the fuel and everything like that, but there's still a gap of time that we still don't know what happened. And Tina spent about 45 minutes with Cooper alone on the plane, and nobody knows publicly what happened. There were rumors that maybe he sexually assaulted her, but we don't know, and there's no evidence to support that. That is strictly rumor. At any rate, by 7:30, the plane's about ready to go. He tells the pilots, fly me to Mexico. And he says, we have to, first we can't leave, we have to file a flight plan. He said, no, you can do that in the air. So that's the second thing that lets everybody know that he knows something about flying airplanes. And he says, well, and then they say, okay, we'll do that. And he says, and I also want to take off with the aft stairs down, which was a real major clue. And the pilots freak out. What do you mean we're going to take off with the aft stairs down? We can't do that. And he says, yes, you can. And there was an argument that started. And then the whole thing came out is that he wanted to fly to Mexico with the aft stairs down. And the pilots had no idea that you could fly a 727 with the aft stairs deployed. And so they went back and forth on this technically. And Northwest Orient, there was nobody in flight operations who knew with certainty that you could fly a 727 safely in the air with the aft stairs deployed, like Cooper was insisting. And the pilots weren't going to take off until they were convinced, that it was safe. Ultimately, the CIA got involved because they were saying, oh yeah, we do that all the time over here in Vietnam. Yeah, tell your pilots that Cooper knows what he's talking about. So when Northwest heard that, they told the pilots, go ahead, you're cleared. You're going to be okay. Cooper also told them some really unique dynamics, metrics about how to fly the plane. He didn't want them to go over 10,000 feet. He wanted them to fly with the landing gear, the wheels down and locked. He wanted the flaps set at 15 degrees. And Radicek told me, he said, when he told me set the flaps at 15, I knew he knew something about this airplane, because the 727 was the only Boeing product that had a pre-dent setting for 15 degrees. Every Boeing jet has lots of pre-dent settings for its wing flaps, so a pilot can just by feel, when it hits a little slot, it knows that it's in a proper setting. The wing flaps give your wings more curve, which gives you greater lift, which means you can fly the plane safely at slower speeds. And what Cooper was giving the pilots was instructions about how to fly the plane at a very slow speed safely so that he could jump out of the plane with minimum turbulence. And he told the pilots 15 degrees and don't go over 200 miles an hour. All of that information I consider that to be the primary clues of the D.B. Cooper case. How did Cooper know that information? The pilots didn't know it, nobody in flight operations knew it, and the only people who knew it were top military commanders and CIA officials in Vietnam. And some Boeing officials later were admitted that they were aware of these kinds of metrics. So the plane takes off, but they don't want to take off with the stairs deployed, so they take off with the stairs in its normal closed position as soon as it gets out of the airport. Cooper, and it decides, because his agreement with the pilots, since you're not going to let me take off with the stairs down, then I'm going to have to keep Tina on board to make sure that I can get the stairs down, which is now another piece of important information. Cooper knew a lot about the plane, but he did not know how to lower the staircase, which is really surprising. You would think if he knew all of this about skydiving out of a 727, how come he didn't know how to lower the staircase? As it turns out, he thought the staircase would be lowered initially by some mechanism that would be released in the cockpit, which is how it's done in military configurations of 727s, but not on the commercial configurations. So it suggests that Cooper's knowledge of 727s and jumping out of them was learned in the military, or from military people, and he didn't know the commercial applications. And to hedge his bets and to keep things safe, he was going to keep Tina on board, at the least for leverage, and also in terms of a practical thing, she was going to show him how to open the staircase. As it turns out, it's a very simple procedure. There's a big lever back there in the galley, and you throw it from the right-hand side to the left-hand side like you're throwing a big switch, and the staircase then slowly descends. And that's it. There's nothing to it. So it was very simple. Tina shows him how to do it as they're flying over Tacoma. And they're heading south. Now, as it turns out, if you're going to fly to Mexico at 10,000 feet with your wheels down, you don't have enough fuel on board to make it because you're going so slow and there's so much air friction and drag, you're going to burn up a lot of fuel. So Northwest Orient says, look, buddy, we're going to have to stop somewhere before we get to Mexico. Let's go down, let's refuel in San Francisco. And he says, no, we're not going out to the coast. Now, the pilots wanted to fly out over the coast so they could have D.B. Cooper jump into the Pacific. As Bill Radachek told me, he said, it was like war. He wanted to get us, we wanted to get him. Let's see how long D.B. Cooper could hold his breath out in the Pacific Ocean in November, in the dark, with 22 pounds of 20s tied around his waist. As it turns out, $200,000 weighs about 22 pounds. And so that's a pretty adversarial position to take. And that was Bill Radachek's perspective. They argue back and forth, and Northwest Orient suggests, well, how about Reno? And Cooper says, yeah, Reno's okay. And so they make plans to go to Reno, and that's where they're going to refuel. When they did that, then basically every cop in Nevada and Northern California descended on the airport at Reno. And they start flying along at 200 miles an hour at 10,000 feet with the air stairs down and the wheels deployed. And everything's unpressurized. And as it turns out, if you fly at 10,000 feet, you still have enough oxygen in the plane so that nobody needs any supplemental oxygen, and you still be able to think straight and be able to function. Anything higher than 10,000 feet, then people start getting headaches, they can't think straight, their physical functions slow down, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so Cooper knew all this stuff, a lot of nuance, a lot of little fine details. About 40 minutes into the flight, they're about 100 miles south of the airport, and he calls, Cooper has already sent Tina to the cockpit. So now Cooper's back by himself by the staircase. Tina and the three cockpit crew are together up in the cockpit. Cooper knows how to use the intercom. He gets on, he says, I can't get the staircase fully deployed, slow it down, and Radachek says, okay, I'm going to set the flaps at 30. Cooper says, okay. So Radachek extends the flaps. The plane slows down even further, and the aft stairs, with less wind resistance coming past it because the plane is flying slower, the staircase from its own weight descends lower down. And about 5 or 10 minutes lapses, and nobody knows what happened. But all of a sudden, about 10 minutes later or so, at approximately 8:13 p.m., the plane starts to really bounce. In pilot terms, the plane started to curtsy. And what they believe happened was that Cooper began walking down the staircase at about 8:12 and took himself about a minute to get down. And once he jumped off the bottom of the staircase, then the stairs bounded back up into the plane and began really swinging up and down, up and down, up and down as the wind would push it, and the momentum of the closing would bang it against the plane, and then it would come down back in the wind, and then the wind would push it back up. And so you had these oscillations. And the pilots had to really control the plane at that time. And it's believed that Cooper left the plane at 8:13. And that's the last anybody knows about D.B. Cooper to this day.
That is just bone-chilling, thinking about how accurate and precise he went about this. I mean, he had to be planning this for months, if not years, to make it all perfect for that one fleeting moment, because he knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime shot.
Pretty much. Yeah, the question is, how much planning? And there are some researchers that would say this took years. And some of the people who have presented certain kinds of suspects, we now have an estimated 900 people who have confessed to being D.B. Cooper, and the FBI has investigated over 1,100 suspects. So this case, this is another one of these freaky, queer, weird kinds of things that's coming up in the D.B. Cooper case. How can you have 900 people confessing to the crime? Are there that many crazy people in the United States? The answer is yes. Plus, we have a lot of people who confess because they think it's going to make their life better. Either they're lonely and they want to be famous, or they're already in jail, or they're in legal trouble, and being in a federal prison for skyjacking is better than being in a state penitentiary for bank robbery or assault or robbery or murder or whatever else. So you have all of these peculiarities that come up, and the majority of the suspects, as it turns out, the D.B. Cooper case is not only the only unsolved skyjacking in the case, it's one of the largest federal investigations of love triangles, because a lot of women realized that accusing their ex-husband or their ex-boyfriend of being D.B. Cooper was a lot better payback than a divorce or anything else. And so a lot of women turned in a lot of guys. And the FBI checked them all out. And there's rooms full of files about bad boys and bad behavior. But none of them are skyjackers.
What do we know? Sorry, go ahead, please.
So we've got a lot of crazy angles to this case.
What do we know about the profile of D.B. Cooper?
Here's what is known, and there's a wide range of disagreements. Virtually nobody describes the same guy, and I find that hard to believe, but that's the truth. When you look at the written information, when you look at the FBI's documentation and their field notes when they started interviewing crew members and passengers, everybody describes a little variation. But here's the general theme. First of all, he's a white guy. Second of all, he's about 6 foot tall. Give him an inch, take away an inch. He's pretty trim looking. So he's about 170 pounds. He doesn't look like an athlete or somebody that works out, but he's fairly athletic looking and trim. He has no beard. He has no jewelry, no ring, no watch, no tattoos. He's got short black hair, parted slightly on the left-hand side. He was wearing a dark suit. Most people say black. Most people say he was wearing a black tie. Most people say he was wearing black slacks. Most people say he had a dark or black or dark brown overcoat, like a light raincoat. Most people say he had some kind of loafers or ankle boots or something like that that may or may not have had a concealed zipper to slide them on. Most say he was calm, respectful. He looked like a businessman going home for Thanksgiving holiday. He dressed like he was some kind of middle management kind of guy. The passengers who sat with him for 5 hours, circling around SeaTac, or 3 hours, 3 hours, thought that he might have been a VIP from the airlines and was getting special deferential treatment because there was always a flight attendant hovering around him. Tina sat next to him for the vast majority of the time. In fact, sometimes she even lit cigarettes for him because for a great amount of time he had a briefcase on his lap that was slightly open, and one passenger said he kept his left hand inside. Tina said that inside the briefcase was what appeared to be a bomb. She saw at least 6, possibly 8, red sticks, which she thought was dynamite, that were taped together, and they were wired to electronic gizmos that were wired up to a large dry cell battery with extended protruding wire connectors. And Cooper said it was a bomb, and Tina thought it looked like a bomb, and that's what she reported. And that's what Northwest Orient went on, the premise that it was a bomb and that it was real. Most people now consider that it was a fake bomb because dynamite does not come in red. In most TV shows, yes, but dynamite is colored red. But in reality, in most construction sites, most dynamite is packed in a brown or tan or beige wrapper, not red. What comes in red are road flares. And so, but clearly nobody wanted to take a chance on blowing the plane up. And the FBI, to their credit, I spoke to a federal agent by the name of Ralph Himmelsbach, who was one of the first on the scene. He was an agent out of the Portland office. He was never the case agent, but he was actively involved in the case. And he certainly is the public face of the FBI's investigation into D.B. Cooper. So most people, when they think FBI and D.B. Cooper, they think of Ralph Himmelsbach. When I spoke to Ralph, he told me, he says the bomb was a game changer because the FBI's preferred approach was to rush a hijacker from multiple angles. And with the 727, you could come up the rear stairs and come in the front stairs through a staircase or a ladder or something like that. So you could have gunmen come in two different directions and they could get the guy. But if you have a bomb, if the skyjacker has a bomb, he just pulls the trigger and, boom, blows the whole thing up, and there goes your intervention. So that is the general physical and psychological and emotional profile of D.B. Cooper. Tina Mucklow described him as being a gentleman and being rather nice, and the other flight attendants offer comparable characteristics, that he looked like a nice guy. In fact, he treated them decently, he spoke to them courteously, and treated them as a gentleman.
$200,000 does not seem like a lot of money today, but back then it was today's equivalent of about $1.1 million. Do we know where he came up with the $200,000 figure? Because at that point he probably could have asked for $1 million and got it.
Here now we're going to start reading the tea leaves a little bit more deeply. As it turns out, we now know that the FBI anticipated this crime. And they had anticipated some kinds of extortion crimes in general, not only skyjackings, but any kind of extortion. And they began stockpiling large sums of money all over the country, not in FBI field offices per se, but each individual field office would make arrangements with a bank to have access to a lot of cash on 24/7 notice. And so the Seattle office, and since the plane flew into Seattle, and most of the hostage negotiations took place in SeaTac Airport, the Seattle office became the office of origination, and they took charge of the case. Even though the skyjacking started in Portland, and Portland wanted the case, it was given to Seattle. And Seattle FBI had a prior arrangement with Seattle First National Bank, and they had hundreds of thousands of dollars ready to go. In fact, it's now believed that the bank actually had $250,000 in 20s ready to go, with all of the serial numbers already pre-recorded, and somebody just had to come down, pick it up, and bring it to the skyjacker. Why he asked for $200,000, that is totally up for speculation. He could have asked for more money. Other skyjackers asked for more. If he asked for the ransom in $100 bills, he could have doubled. He could have, increased the amount, 500%, and wouldn't have added any more weight to his ransom and his getaway. His getaway. That is like an important consideration: is how much money, how much weight can a skydiver safely carry. And it is generally believed that about 20 to 25 pounds of money dangling from your hip, so you would have an asymmetrical load, would be the upper limit in terms of safety. Now, you could carry more weight if you could evenly distribute it, but then you have to worry about bags ripping open, flapping open, having them secured, tying them tightly to the body. You end up complicating things. So it seems like that the 22 pounds of 20s was the most reasonable perspective. Now, that's assuming that Cooper was interested in the money. And there's a lot of people who think that D.B. Cooper didn't do this for the money. And this, that it was just an extraneous element to the skyjacking. But that's totally speculative.
I don't understand why he wouldn't do it for the money. Was he just doing it for the thrill then, just to see if he could get away with it?
Some people think that. Barb Dayton certainly wasn't interested in the money. She was interested in proving something to herself. There's a lot of people who believe that this was an inside job, that this was D.B. Cooper was some kind of commando or covert operative or a rogue CIA guy that was doing this for political purposes, that the skyjacking situation was getting so out of control, the Pilots Association was up in arms about the danger of flying airplanes because anybody could walk onto a plane with anything, and there was no effort, and there seemed to be no concerns by management or politically about the inherent dangers of flying on an airplane. And they wanted changes. When you look at the bigger picture, airline safety after Cooper improved. And there is a compelling case to say, was the D.B. Cooper skyjacking a false flag operation conducted by the government or elements within the government to create the political environment so that the federal government could federalize airline safety? Now, here's the situation from the airline's point of view. 1971. Anybody can walk onto any plane at any time at any airport with anything, and no one's going to say or do anything. There's a few marshals flying on planes who are armed, and so if the guy says, "I'm going to go to Cuba," there might be a marshal saying, "I don't think so." But that's only 1 out of 100 flights, and flying marshals around is very, very expensive, and it doesn't satisfy the solution. You're going to have a gun battle whenever a marshal tries to take down a skyjacker. You're going to have a shootout at 30,000 feet. Give me a break. So, from the airline's point of view, if they were going to install a much more comprehensive and sophisticated level of surveillance and screening, such as what we have today, baggage screening, metal detectors, passenger identification, background checks, or anything like that. No one was thinking background checks in 1971. But the notion of having some kind of metal detector or some kind of pat-down or some kind of inspection of each individual passenger, so no one's going on a plane with a knife or a gun or anything like that, that was fairly radical. And the question is, how do you implement anything like that? From the airline's point of view, if the federal government took over that issue, then all airlines would have to comply with the same regulations, and none of the El Cheapo special airlines could undercut the legacy airlines like United or American. So, and that's what the big airlines wanted. They wanted everybody to be compelled to do the same thing with the same equipment. So all of the metal detectors would be the same. All of the screening procedures would be the same. All airports would have all of the same kind of protocols and procedures, so there wouldn't be any weak links in the chain of security. And that's eventually what happened. And this was the beginning of the airline safety protocols and programs that we now have. And it all kind of began back in the 1970s. It didn't happen right away, but over time, skyjacking became a thing of the past.
We only got about 90 seconds before we got to go to break here. So okay. You mentioned that you believe that it is one of the theories that this was an inside job. Do you think he had help outside of the airplane, or do you think that maybe Tina Mucklow was the only one to help him?
Well, we only got 90 seconds, so let's save this for the next hour. But in general, Tina, I do not believe, was involved in any way, shape, or form. And we can talk a lot more about Tina in the next hour. Do I think this was an inside job? Possibly, but I don't think so. And we'll talk about some of those issues in the next hour. Did Cooper have outside help? Possibly, and we'll talk about that, because one thing that no one ever talks about, how did Cooper get away? He made it to the ground, one way or the other, alive or dead. He was on the ground by 8:30 at night. Then what happened? And there's compelling circumstantial evidence to say that he had a ground team ready to pick him up.
So considering there is Bigfoot in that area, you're not thinking Bigfoot stole him?
Nope. And Bigfoot is not really in that area. He jumped out. Where he jumped out, this is another one of these secondary mysteries. To this day, nobody knows with any great certainty where he landed, and they don't know where he landed because they don't know where he jumped. They don't know where the plane was when he jumped, which is like, how can that? You got to be kidding me! How in this day and age? How come we don't know where the plane was at 8:13 in the evening?
And on that note, we're going to hop out for a break here on Spaced Out Radio. More D.B. Cooper talk right after this with author Bruce A. Smith. Mountain News. Check it out on Google right now.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, news director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries, so tune in at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Have you ever had an extraterrestrial experience? One you just couldn't explain? Well, maybe I can help. Hello, I am Samantha Mullet. On the second Tuesday of each month, I will join Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio to bring a human aspect to ET contact. It's something I've lived with my entire life, and I'd love to help you understand. Let's share our experiences. The ET Experience, the second Tuesday of each month, only on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, this is Jolene with Rivulet Reiki and Readings, and I want you to relax. Let me help you chill out and get in touch with your body, mind, and soul. In this busy world, sometimes we need to let go, and this is where I can help. Visit my website, rivuletrr.wix.com/rivuletrr&r.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness. You can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Hi there, this is your psychic medium, Joanna, and I would love it if you would join us every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. With host James Tyson, we'll bring you personal psychic messages on two mediums and a large. Questions about love, life, career changes. We would love it if you would come and join us live. Call in and listen in for the experience. Allow us to open the doors to your other side. Two mediums and a large, heard only on Spaced Out Weekend at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you'd like to hear on Spaced Out Radio? Let us know at spacedoutradio.com, where you can sign up to become a Space Traveler member today. Or you can find us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on our Facebook page, Spaced Out Radio Show. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, we will be joined by Craig Weiler. We're going to be talking about the Ganzfeld experiment as we go into all sorts of paranormal tomorrow night. We want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you along for the ride. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for the SOR Space Travelers for the night. Sequestrate is your password. Sequestrate. He's taking it easy on me tonight. You know what to do with it, Space Travelers. If you are a member, use the password wisely. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Spaced Out Radio on Twitter. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you to follow there, so make sure you check out our site. And remember, if you're chatting on Twitter, do me a favor. Use the hashtag spacedoutradio, and we will get to it ASAP. Tonight we are talking about the legendary case of D.B. Cooper. Author Bruce A. Smith is our guest. All you got to do is Google Mountain News D.B. Cooper. It's going to open up a plethora of information for you. Bruce, welcome back to Spaced Out Radio.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about D.B. Cooper.
And you know what? We're going to have to do this again in a couple of months because I am absolutely thrilled with this, and I don't even think we're going to scratch the tip of the iceberg tonight in the 3 hours. So we're going to have to do this again very, very soon. Before we start, though, I do want to catch up on some questions from our audience. This one coming from Mike in the SOR Space Travelers Club. He's saying, Bruce, what do you think about the bundle of money found on a sandbar along the Columbia River, the 2 parachutes found a few years ago, and the connection to Vancouver, British Columbia?
Well, it's a couple different questions. Let me take one at a time. The bundles of money. First of all, there were 2 money finds on a place called Tina Beach. Or Tina Bar is the actual term. For some reason, in that section of the Columbia River, all the beaches are called bars, and I don't know how that got started, but people think of it, there must be some kind of sandbar in the middle of the river that they found the money. That's not the case. It's just an old beach on the side of the river, and it's called Tina, and that's what the sign is, and some people call it Tena, and I'm a little confused on why people do that. So again, that's part of the D.B. Cooper mystery. It's like no one agrees on anything. You can't even agree on the signs or what the place is called. But there were 2 money finds, and here are the money finds, and both are very different kinds of money finds, and they both are very confusing and difficult to understand. On February 10th, on a Sunday afternoon in 1980, a family found 3 bundles of 20s just an inch or 2 underneath the sand, and they were stacked on top of each other. And the bundles were very compressed. You couldn't pull the bills apart, but the rubber bands were still intact. When people touched them, they fell apart. But upon discovery, the rubber bands were still there around the bundles. How did the bundles get there? Nobody knows. Did somebody plant them? Maybe. There's a lot of theories and a lot of suspects that depend on the plant theory. However, when the family started telling people, hey, we found $6,000 worth of money, but we can't pull any of the bills apart, what should we do with it? They said, well, maybe you should take it to the cops because maybe it was part of the D.B. Cooper thing. And they're saying, who's D.B. Cooper? This family had come from Oklahoma, had moved into the area just prior to the discovery of the money, and so they went to the local cops, and the cops said, well, you better take this to the FBI. Called the FBI, and they said, we'll be right over there. And sure enough, the serial numbers checked out, and the FBI went to the beach on Tuesday. And so the money was found Sunday afternoon. The FBI checks it out on Monday. Tuesday, the FBI is at the beach with shovels and a gang of people, and they start digging everything up like an archaeological site. They gridded the beach. They had screening boxes, yada, yada, yada. They find a second pile of money, but very different kinds of money. This time, they found itsy-bitsy, teensy-weensy pieces of money scattered all over the place, about 2 to 3 feet down. It's like, how did this money get here? It's scattered out underneath where the first 3 bundles were found, but it goes out in each direction about 20 feet. So this begins to open up the question, maybe this has to do with a dredging operation that took place. Now, a lot of big freighters come up and down the Columbia River, and it has to get dredged, the channel, the freighter channel, has to get dredged out every few years. And maybe the dredge picked up the money and threw it up on the beach, and some of the money got torn up, and there's thousands and thousands of pieces, and got spread out somehow. And then on top of that was like a cherry on top of the cake, and that was the 3 bundles. And somehow 3 bundles made it through the sluice and the pipe and the dredging material, dredging devices, and was intact. And boom. Now, that would be some very, very strange hydrological phenomena to pull off both of those things. The FBI brought in hydrologists, and they studied the soils and things like that, and that just complicates things even more. And the hydrologist reported to the FBI, he thinks the money did not arrive by dredge, and arrived at the beach after the last dredging in 1974. And the current the current law enforcement perspective, or the FBI perspective, is that the money arrived at the beach a year or two before discovery. So that would be 78, maybe 79. And that shoots out of the water all of these speculations and suspects, and this was a plant, and the History Channel documentary last July really went into this in a big way, and that the family that found it knew they were going to find it, and they had been tipped off, and they were in on this, and, blah, 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 blah. But nobody can explain all of the money pieces found at 3 feet down. So that's the money, and I forget what all the questions. There were a couple parachutes found.
Yes, the parachutes that were found.
Okay. A number of parachutes have been found in the area, and let me tell you what I know. And I don't know a lot about some of these findings, but I'll tell you what I know. The first big finding was in 2009, and there was a large chute that was found in Amboy, Washington, which is considered one of the primary landing zones. The FBI calls it Landing Zone A. And a big chute was found, and a lot of controversy surrounds that. And to this day, I have never seen the chute, nor have I spoken to anybody who has ever seen the chute. And nobody in Amboy fesses up to saying, yeah, the chute was found on my property. In Amboy, it's widely rumored that the guy who found it was wanted for other crimes, like and fill in the blank on what kind of crime, was drug dealing, he was running around with somebody's wife, whatever. Plenty of rumors. This is typical D.B. Cooper story, rumor mill, and it's one of the joys and one of the frustrations of investigating the case, because every time you turn around, there's another whiz-bango, crazy, off-the-wall story that just complicates everything. The Amboy chute, I do not believe, was D.B. Cooper's parachute, because they called in a rigger by the name of Earl Cossey, and I talked to Earl Cossey, and Earl Cossey told me, he says, the chute that was 32 feet wide. It was a cargo chute, and I take his word on that. Now, Earl Cossey has lied to me and has lied to many other journalists about a lot of things, and he's lied to the FBI about a lot of stuff, and we can talk about Earl Cossey and all of his lies and deceptions and what was true and what wasn't true and why he lied. And the bottom line is, how come Earl Cossey was murdered 3 years ago, which is another interesting story. So we have a lot of good stuff to get into, but let's just put that on a back burner right for now. That's one parachute. Other parachutes have been found. There was a small reserve parachute found in the mud and tidal area along an island in the Columbia River called Reed Island, I think a year ago or something like that, and it was believed to have been a reserve parachute, so it was fairly small. I think it was 24 feet or 26 feet in diameter, and there has been no conclusive analysis or investigation of it, so I don't know the status. What was found, the reserve chutes are themselves an item of mystery. When the plane landed for refueling in Reno, D.B. Cooper was not on board, and the FBI was shocked to find out that he had actually jumped. In retrospect, it's like, yo, fellas, what were you thinking? He had parachutes and he lowered the staircase. What did you think he was going to do? But the fact that nobody had ever jumped out of a plane before, and particularly being that it was 8 o'clock at night, it was raining out, it was November, it was friggin' cold out. Why would anybody jump? Well, that's the nature of a large law enforcement agency. they're not very creative or imaginative. And so when you do an inventive and creative and imaginative crime, the guys looking for you are not on your wavelength. They're not thinking like you. And so that was a mental straitjacket that the FBI had put themselves in. Not only did they not find D.B. Cooper, they did not find one of the reserve chutes. And there was thinking is that, well, the reserve chute that was not on board the plane has got to be out there somewhere. And the fact that there were a lot of things that were not on the plane. So here's a list of things that were not on the plane and supposedly went out the door with D.B. Cooper. So D.B. Cooper, we know he was wearing a back chute because Tina said that before she went into the cockpit that D.B. Cooper had put on a parachute and he was tying the money to his hip. So we know that's going on. One reserve parachute he had opened up and had cut some of the rope from the parachute and was using that rope to tie up the money bag. The briefcase and the bomb was not found on the plane. And also, too, we now know from interviews with passengers that they saw a fairly large satchel that had never been reported or talked about publicly much, that was 4 inches thick and about 12 by 14. So it's kind of like like these cloth grocery store bags that people use now instead of the plastic or the paper. You bring in your own paper, your own cloth bag to save on the recycling of paper and plastic. It'd be about that size, and that was not on the plane. And the only thing of D.B. Cooper's personal stuff that was found on the plane was the tie. So the question is, if everything else is missing, how come D.B. Cooper left his tie behind? Did he throw everything else out of the plane or whatever, or did he tie everything together in a great big bundle or whatever? But at any rate, there's a reserve chute missing, and nobody knows where it is. And the question is this reserve chute that was found on Reed Island in the middle of the Columbia River, is that the reserve chute from D.B. Cooper? We don't know. Probably not, because Reed Island is way up the river, and if the parachute ended up there, then the parachute would have had, then when the parachute left the plane would have had to have been south of the Columbia River, over Oregon, probably over Portland, and it would have drifted in the wind significantly, because since we don't know where the flight path is, we're just speculating on where the plane is. But Reed Island is way to the east of the probable flight path. So it's like, how did this thing end up in the river? And nobody knows. And so are there other parachutes that they found? Maybe. I'm not familiar with it. Maybe the listener can give us more information about more parachutes and what I'm missing. And the last question from the listener, I've lost total track of what that last
it was the tie to Vancouver, British Columbia.
Okay, the tie to to Vancouver and BC. This gets rather far down the rabbit hole of suspects. There is one suspect who is considered to be a significant suspect, and his name is Wolfgang Gossett. And a number of people advocate for him, most particularly a researcher, a long-time researcher, and a well-respected researcher by the name of Galen Cook. And I recommend that you have him on your show. Galen, his information that has been released publicly, and the Gossett family has spoken publicly, and they say that Wolfgang Gossett, who is now deceased, but so his children are speaking out. They say Dad told them that he was D.B. Cooper and he put the money in a bank in Vancouver, and that's all they know, in a safe deposit box. There's no key, there's no name of the bank, there's no identification number on what box number it might have been or anything like that. Galen has been looking at the banks. He's been working with law enforcement in Vancouver and also in Victoria, BC. And as far as I know, there's nothing definitive that has come out from those investigations. So all we have is circumstantial ties to Vancouver. The other thing that comes out also about Vancouver also ties in through Galen Cook's research, and those are the letters that the FBI and media were receiving immediately after the skyjacking. There were a slew of letters that came in to newspapers and the FBI office written by somebody calling themselves D.B. Cooper. Now remember, the skyjacker signed in as Dan Cooper. And so the question is, how do we go from Dan Cooper, the skyjacker, to D.B. Cooper, the famous skyjacker? And in the early hours of the case, there was confusion at the Associated Press, and one journalist began commenting that they were looking for D. Cooper because the flight manifest had first initial last name, so they weren't looking for Dan Cooper, they were looking for D. Cooper. And one journalist mixed that up and said, is that D or B? And the person on the other end of the line saying yes, so the journalist is writing it down as D and B Cooper. And then another cop is talking to another journalist and is saying, I understand you're looking for D.B. Cooper. And the cop they were talking to knew that there was a burglar in Portland by the name of D.B. Cooper, and the FBI had just been informed about that. And so the FBI was saying, yeah, go pick up your guy D.B. Cooper too. And so all of this is going on in the first few hours of the skyjacking. And so Dan Cooper then becomes D.B. Cooper, and the name stuck. And even the FBI stopped trying to call the guy Dan Cooper, and they now call him D.B. Cooper too. So all these letters are coming in the next week from D.B. Cooper. And the question is, are any of them legit? Are any of them from the skyjacker? Are they all bogus? What does it all mean? And one of the places, there are a number of letters that are called the core four letters. There are 4 letters that are written kind of like as haikus. They're kind of short and concise and pithy and little smart-assy. And those 4 letters are considered to have been written by the same guy. And Galen has done a lot of research on them, and one of the letters was postmarked and sent in Vancouver, BC, and sent to a newspaper in Vancouver. So those are the connections to Vancouver that I'm aware of.
Another question coming in from Mike in the Space Out Radio chat room on Spreaker. He is asking, did Cooper bail out on a known flight path, or did he direct the flight to where he was going to bail
out? It's uncertain where the plane was when D.B. Cooper bailed out. However, all we know is that Cooper said, fly me to Mexico, and then they were going to go to Reno. Now, when you fly at 10,000 feet out of Seattle, because of all the mountains that are around, like Mount Rainier is 14,000 feet high, Mount Hood is 12,000 feet high, et cetera, et cetera. So there's in the Cascades, you've got a lot of high mountains. All the planes flying at 10,000 feet are going to fly in a very narrow corridor. Unbeknownst to most people, planes don't fly wherever they want to go. They're routed by flight control into flight corridors. And coming south out of SeaTac Airport, there is one primary commercial route called Victor 23, and it's 8 miles wide and basically follows the I-5 corridor going south from Seattle to Portland, and it keeps on going south into California. And it is believed that Flight 305 generally followed the Victor 23 flight corridor, which would put it over Ariel, Washington, and Amboy, and those other towns that are kind of associated with the ground search. A lot of activity took place in Ariel. The big festival for D.B. Cooper takes place at the tavern in Ariel and stuff like that. And Ariel and Amboy are about 25 miles north of the Columbia River, north of Portland, Oregon. So that's, I hope I've answered the guy's question.
Mario is asking if there was a flight recorder on board to get the precise times.
I'm a little hazy on that. There should have been voice recorders on board, and I know there's a lot of commentary in the chat rooms now about will the magnetic tapes still be readable and usable and viable at this point. I don't know of anybody that has listened recently to the flight recorders. I know that there are transcripts that have been transcribed, and they are part of the official evidence collection, which adds more mystery because the flight transcripts have different sections. The first section of transcript, I believe, is something like 40 or 50 pages and covers transmissions from the cockpit to flight control to Seattle Center from the beginning of the getaway flight all the way past Portland to somewhere in central Oregon, where it got switched over to a flight control center in Northern California, just south of the Oregon border. The transcripts read radically different from the two centers, and the question would be, why? Were there different people, or they did it differently, or just what was going on? Adding more confusion, the transcripts from the Seattle Center are heavily redacted. There are 19 sections that are blacked out, and the official statement on that explanation is that it had to do with extraneous messages with neighboring air traffic, and they wanted to preserve the not privacy but proprietary concerns of who was flying what and where and things like that. I consider that explanation to be bogus. A lot of people feel that the redactions prove that something else was going on in the air during the time that D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane. And I think that is a very plausible, very reasonable speculation to hold to explain the redactions.
Couple questions from the United Public Radio Network chat room. This one coming from Dr. E. He is asking, did you ever get a chance to interview his niece, Marla Cooper?
Yeah, I have talked to Marla Cooper on occasion. The last time I talked with her, she was driving en route to one of her family members in Idaho, and she hung up the phone on me and has never spoken to me ever since. Her last words to me were, "I'm done talking to you, Bruce." Click. So the question is, so yes, I have spoken to Marla, but let's expound on that, about what Marla is saying and what I think has been going on. I have written extensively about Marla Cooper. I've interviewed many people in the family. I've interviewed Arlen Dorney, who was the detective who worked with Marla and helped her organize her case and present it and come up with an affidavit that she presented to the FBI in, I believe, 2010, which formed the basis of the FBI's investigation, which exploded on the world in 2011 when the FBI publicly announced that they had the most promising suspect in the D.B. Cooper case, and that would be Marla's uncle Lynn Doyle, or L.D. Cooper. And that was a big, big story, and the question is, at this point, what was that all about? Because nobody at this point believes that Lynn Doyle Cooper was D.B. Cooper. And it's like, if the evidence is so lame, so weak, what was all the fuss about? And we can talk at length about that.
So what was the fuss then?
I think to me, in short, the short version is, I believe the FBI was trying to bury the D.B. Cooper case. And they got a portfolio, they got an affidavit from Marla and Arlen Dorney that had received an imprimatur from an FBI agent who, to this day, is still unknown and unnamed. Marla tells me that she does not know the guy's name. Arlen Dorney says, I can't tell you the guy's name because he's working undercover for the FBI in the Organized Crime Division, and I know him because I worked with him professionally when I was a detective in narcotics for the Elk City, Oklahoma Police Department. And that's all Arlen will tell me, and at this point, Arlen refuses to talk with me and hangs up every time I call and does not respond to messages. Who that guy is, I don't know. I've talked to a former chief of the Organized Crime Division who was participating in the History Channel documentary, and he does not know who this guy was. And he looked at me kind of funny, like sideways, when I began to describe that somebody from his former department was being cited as the go-between between the Marla Cooper side of things and the FBI office in Seattle, in specifics, the case agent Curtis Eng. He didn't know anything about it, which I found disappointing, but be that as it may. I think the FBI tried to bury the case psychologically, and when they found a reasonably decent suspect with the name L.D. Cooper, they knew that in the public's mind, everybody was going to confuse that with D.B. Cooper. And if they started telling people, well, we found L.D. Cooper, then people are going to think, well, they found D.B. Cooper. And Marla is beautiful, she's sexy, she's curvy, she's blonde, she's a great storyteller, and she's great in front of a camera. And when they saw her walk in the room, it is my speculation that Curtis Eng and everybody in Seattle said, we just found our girl to sell our story. And I think this was a psychological operation to bury the D.B. Cooper case. A lot of things surround the Marla story, the timing of the case, that involve other journalists. The FBI at that time was very eager and very happy to share all their files and their evidence with selected journalists and selected citizens, and they formed a citizen sleuth team to help them organize the case and investigate and to do private research on the evidence and stuff like that. In effect, the FBI formed a team of FBI auxiliaries. The work that was done is very uneven, but it's very intriguing. And so the whole citizen sleuth contribution to the FBI, to the D.B. Cooper case, is fascinating and is very valuable. So whatever the underlying agendas might have been, the reality is that the citizen sleuth did a lot of good work, and I salute them. I just don't know what the whole story is. I don't know what the whole truth is. There's another journalist by the name of Jeffrey Gray who was actively and intimately involved in the case and wrote a great book at that time called Skyjack. And I believe that Jeffrey made a deal. He said, you can see everything, you can see all the D.B. Cooper stuff, but whatever you write is going to have to make us look good. And when Marla came along, they told Jeffrey, by the way, we want you to sell the Marla story. And I only have circumstantial evidence to support that. I've confronted Jeffrey multiple times on my concerns and my speculations, and he has never answered me to my satisfaction. He dodges me every time. He walks away. I chased after him one night in Portland, and he was always 3 steps ahead of me every step of the way, and he wouldn't answer my questions. So that's what's going on with Marla, as far as I'm concerned.
Next question from Dr. E. Was there ever a radar surveillance for that area with the hijacked plane? It would have been standard protocol, would it not?
Yes, it would have been. And where the radar transcripts are now is one of the great mysteries. Your listener sounds very well informed, and there's a lot of missing stuff. What is missing is all the radar transcripts from the planes that were following the hijacked plane, or following Cooper. There were 2 F-106s. No, I've never heard any reports of where those radar transcripts are. There was a T-33 that came on into the hunt. God knows where that radar is. And anything that came out of McCord Air Force Base, which was actively assisting Seattle Center and the flight controllers, the commercial air traffic controllers were being assisted greatly by the military personnel at McCord Air Force Base, which is about 20 miles south of SeaTac Airport. I've never known anyone to see the transcripts. I don't know where they are. There's been no corroborating evidence that one way or the other, and there's wild speculations about what happened to them and where they're disappeared, or are they disappeared, or just what their status is. The most, and I write about this, the most compelling piece of information for me is this, one of two ways. Either our radar technology was so good, and we saw D.B. Cooper leaving the airplane, and we had a cop waiting for him in the ground. Either it was that good, and we didn't want the Russians to know how good our tech was, so we kept it quiet, or the reverse. We should have known where D.B. Cooper was, but our radar systems were so fashukta that we never knew where D.B. Cooper is, and we don't want the Russians to know that either. And we don't want the American taxpayer to know how bad our radar system is either. So you can play it either way. And satisfy your own conspiracy theory on that. But the fact that there's no documentation or summary reports or anything like that seem to be in the FBI files, there's no one talking about it or anything like that, suggests that the radar transcripts got 86th pretty quick. For whatever reason, who knows?
Final question from Dr. E. He is saying, it's been reported that D.B. Cooper jumped over a very heavily wooded area, when in actuality he jumped over farmland and had planned his jump. What do you know about where he landed?
Well, since we don't know where he landed or where he jumped, where the plane was when he jumped, we can't really ascertain exactly what kind of terrain he landed in. But let's take the FBI at face value. Let's say he landed somewhere in the vicinity of where the FBI think he did. So that's landing zone A, which would be Ariel and Amboy. We're talking rolling countryside. It's mixed. Are there some forests? Yes. Are there some hills? Yes. Are there any mountains? No. Are there steep ravines? Yes. Are there dangerous places to land in a parachute? Yes. Is there a lot of it? No. Was there a lot of ambient light? Yes. Were there a lot of homes? Yes. A lot of barns? Yes. A lot of roads? Yes. It's a mixed rural area 25 miles north of Portland, Oregon. So we're not talking the deep woods, we're not talking wilderness or anything like that. You want to talk about Bigfoot. Bigfoot, the largest concentration of Bigfoot sightings is in a place called the Dark Divide, which is about 60, 70 miles due east of landing zone A, on the other side of the Cascade Range, on the other side of Mount St. Helens. And that Dark Divide is an area that is the largest roadless area in the continental United States, in the lower 48. Now, that would be some serious. So if the plane was 60 miles due east than where we think it was, that would be some serious place to land in a parachute and be really tough to get out of. But that doesn't seem to be the case. D.B. Cooper basically landed in a slightly suburban, mostly agricultural, rural kind of area.
Cop has a question in the UPRN chat room. He is asking, did you ever check NORAD for the radar records?
I haven't, no. There's a report from NORAD. There's a journalist by the name of Dell Ferguson. I've tried contacting Adele. It's my understanding she's still alive and lives in nearby, but she's unresponsive to my requests for communication. She interviewed a guy by the name of Dan Dawson, who was a major in NORAD at the time of the skyjacking. He later became a politician and a state legislator here in Washington State, and Adele worked with him extensively on political stuff. She did a retrospective on him and his memories of what happened that night that D.B. Cooper stole his airplane. And he said that he was in direct communication with Norad, and he was based in McCord, and was responsible for two things. He was responsible for procuring parachutes for D.B. Cooper, and he was responsible for preparing the chase planes. And he says he said to Adele that he was told by his commanders in NORAD to tell the pilots to back off, and he was also told to take the chafe out of the parachutes. As it turns out, later, D.B. Cooper refused the parachutes from McCord and wanted civilian parachutes that came from civilian sources. That's all I know about NORAD.
Another question from Cop here. He is asking, and let me just find it here. Were there any fingerprints? Was there any DNA tests done on any of the evidence found?
Yes and no. Here's what I know. There's, again, a lot of mystery. And the question is, well, how much DNA has been found? And, that all depends who you talk to. How many fingerprints were found? Again, one FBI agent says 11, another says 60. It's like, whoa, we're not even close here. And the bottom line is, and I got this from the case agent Larry Carr, who was case agent in 2007, 2008, 2009, when I began researching this case. Larry Carr told me, he said they found 60 prints, 60 sets of prints. And so I'm not quite sure what makes a set. I'm assuming maybe 10 fingers maybe per set. So you might have hundreds of actual individual fingerprints out of these 60 sets. He said they were all smudged. That has been widely reported by other FBI agents. There's a lot of work that's been done on the FBI, on the D.B. Cooper case, by an FBI agent by the name of Russ Callum. His book is called D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, and he got involved in the D.B. Cooper case because he collared one of the D.B. Cooper copycats by the name of Richard McCoy. And at the time, a lot of people thought that Richard McCoy was D.B. Cooper doing a second skyjacking to get more money. It worked so good the first time, he was going to try it a second time. The question is twofold. Why was the fingerprints collected, why were they all smudged? And you can say, well, most fingerprints, most of the time, in most crime scenes are smudged. That's not unusual. It's like, okay, maybe the D.B. Cooper case is following statistical norms. Okay. But when you dig into it, certainly when you read Callum's work, it was widely reported by Callum in the field that other agents were saying they really scooched the pooch when it came to fingerprints in Reno. I don't know. And at this point, I don't know why the FBI is not getting innovative and creative with the fingerprint samples that they do have, where even though some things are smudged, you can begin to form partial prints and reconstruct potential completions of what the fingerprints could be if they weren't smudged. So you would have hundreds of possibilities, but you would think in this day and age of supercomputers and things like that, you could form profiles of maybe of your top 100 or your top 1,000 possibility of fingerprints and run them through your database and see if you get any hits. I don't know if anybody's doing that. Now, that's for fingerprints. Now, DNA gets a lot more complicated. DNA, the best samples of, back in 1971, nobody thought about DNA as evidence. Nobody thought of it as being a forensic tool. DNA analysis only started coming of age in the 1980s, and by the 1990s it was kind of gathering steam in the FBI, and by the end of the 1990s it was full bore ahead. And the question at that point was, is there anything left in the evidence collection that we can test for DNA? And the answer is yes. Even though, and specifically, 8 cigarette butts that were smoked by D.B. Cooper that were retrieved in Reno. Now, the dried saliva on those cigarette butts would be prime sources of DNA and really zero in on the identity of D.B. Cooper, at least genetically. Now, we know the FBI processed those cigarette butts. Then they disappeared. To this day, we don't know where those cigarette butts are. And we don't know where the paperwork and the documentation and the findings are of the processing that has been acknowledged by Larry Carr in a public forum called the Drop Zone Chat Room. Now, there are other sources of DNA that have been obtained. So, okay, maybe the FBI lost the cigarette butts somewhere, and maybe someone's looking for them or isn't looking for them, or somebody threw them out or whatever. Okay, let's say the cigarette butts are gone from history. What else is left? Well, we got the tie, and they've done DNA sampling of residues on the tie, and they have identified 3 separate males' DNA samples on the tie. Now, what has been done with them? Has there been any cross-referencing? Whose DNA is on those ties? Is it FBI agents? Is it D.B. Cooper? Is it flight attendants? Is it anybody who owned the tie, who used the tie before D.B. Cooper did? Who knows? Nobody knows. I do not know of any definitive identification of those 3 male DNA samples. And I think that's a major failing at this point. And for the FBI to close the case without revealing their findings of a sophisticated and advanced nature, given today's technology, I think is irresponsible.
Were there any witnesses on the ground? I know it happened at night, but, you know, there was a native reservation, according to COP, in the area. There were people around. People are obviously probably looking up in the sky, seeing a low-flying 727 or jet aircraft in the night, probably a little suspicious about that. Did anybody report seeing anything?
Yes. And the reports are quite varied. And the question is, how far down this rabbit hole do you want to crawl? What we do know with some degree of certainty is the plane was around 10,000 feet. So it's not real low to the ground, but it's not real high either, okay? There are plenty of people in Ariel and Amboy who swear that the plane was much lower and that they saw planes flying. They saw a 727 or they saw a jetliner flying really low, and the lowest cloud that night would be around 3,000 feet. So if you can see a plane, that means it's not more than 3,000 feet off the ground. But we do not have any corroboration of those reports. All we've got is statements that the plane was at 10,000 feet. Okay, how do you challenge that? I don't know. Now, we also have reports that people saw somebody, a solo male, a singular figure, walking down roads in the Ariel and Amboy area that night. And they did not stop, and they did not inquire, they did not identify. All we have is a report that so-and-so saw so-and-such at night, and that's it. So, more to the point is, where were the cops? We know at this point that the initial search for D.B. Cooper was weak in the extreme. I have asked Washington State Patrol for a description or a characterization of checkpoints and of security and of roadblocks or anything like that in the area. They have not been forthcoming with any information. As far as I can tell, the most scrutiny that was given to the area were radio reports warning drivers not to pick up hitchhikers in the I-5 area around Woodland, Washington, which would be due west of Ariel and Amboy. Further, we know that nobody went looking for D.B. Cooper until the next morning, when there was a flyover by Ralph Himmelsbach in his private plane around 9:30 in the morning. If they were looking for a parachute. Ralph was looking for a parachute. He was the first eyes on the area. That means that D.B. Cooper had at least a 13-hour head start before anybody was looking for him, even by plane. In terms of people actually going on the ground looking for him, I spoke to the guy that led the ground search, and he told me he was the undersheriff of the Clark County Sheriff's Department. Now, the ground search in Landing Zone A was outsourced by the FBI to local sheriff's departments because the FBI prioritized their manpower, and they went to the airports to question and interrogate other airline clerks, personnel, people in the airports, cabbies, bus drivers, hotel clerks, things like that. They felt that that was the best use of their investigatory capacities. So actually looking for the skyjacker was given to the local grunts. They didn't have a whole lot of deputies to go out, so they began recruiting like fire department guys and volunteers and things like that, guys who worked in the area who would be able to take care of themselves in the woods, who they could trust to be a reasonable and professional ground searcher. I talked to Tom McDowell. He was the guy in charge of all of this. He said he had about 20, 30 guys total, and they didn't deploy until the afternoon of Friday. So D.B. Cooper had a 40-hour head start before anybody was on the ground, actually in the mud, looking for him. And Tom told me, he said they were out through the weekend, and they were pulled off the job by Monday, never to return. And he was assigned approximately 23 square miles to search, and with his 20 guys, he said they did about 1 mile. So they covered about 5% of the landing zone, giving D.B. Cooper not only a 40-hour head start, but giving D.B. Cooper 22 acres to extricate himself.
Let's get to a couple more questions here from our audience because they are all over the board with you right now. They are loving you. Loving you.
Good.
Gail has an incredible question here that I think makes just a ton of sense. She says, Bruce, is it conceivable that Mr. Cooper never left the plane and was actually hidden on board, perhaps with the help from a crew member?
Is it conceivable? Yes, and the FBI has thought about that a lot, and it's a question that comes up all the time. And the question is, where would you hide? There's a number of questions. First thing is, okay, where would D.B. Cooper hide? The first place, certainly where the pilots looked and where the FBI first looked, was in the in the aft stair storage area, next to where the staircase comes up and joins the fuselage. There are some little tiny storage areas that a person could be inside of and could stash himself away in there. Now, a person can get himself in there. The question is, where'd the money go? And all the stuff that was never found in Reno. Was everything stashed? Well, maybe, but let's not get carried away on this. But maybe there's other places. Now, did he go above the lavatory? Maybe he crawled into the above compartments where the overhead bins are. Maybe in some of those areas. Could he stash himself up there? And it's like, well, if he did, then how did he get away from the plane? Maybe did he dress up as a mechanic or a flight personnel or something like that and try to slip away in the confusion down in Reno? Maybe. But how did he get away from the airport? Run through the woods? Steal a car? It gets kind of complicated pretty quickly. And there's another possibility that some airlines people say he may have been able to worm his way in through floorboards under the rear seats in row 18 into the luggage compartment. Now, how he would put everything back into place from the luggage compartment, I don't know, and no one's ever explained that. But if he got himself into the luggage compartment, then what did he do? Did he stay there and get off the plane. We don't even know exactly where the plane went after it left Reno. The official report is that it went back to Boeing Field, and Boeing fixed everything that was broken on it when it landed in Reno, and the aft stairs was banging off of the runway as it was coming down. But Jeffrey Gray says that the FBI report says is that the FBI flew the plane to Langley so that they could take the rear seats out of the plane and send in the headrests and everything else for microscopic hair analysis. So did D.B. Cooper fly in the luggage compartment to Boeing Field and then get out, or did he go all the way to Langley and then get out there? And supposedly the plane is going to be at 20,000, 30,000 feet at the very least going to Boeing Field, and it's not pressurized. What did he breathe for oxygen? Did he bring oxygen with him? It gets pretty complicated pretty fast. And to me, to say that maybe he stowed away, you're going to have to come up with a lot of explanations about where he stayed and how he got away. I think it's a lot more plausible to assume that D.B. Cooper actually used his parachute and jumped.
I want to slip in one quick question here before we go to break, because we're about 60 seconds away. And this comes from Jerry in Revolution Radio, and he is asking, did Cooper leave the so-called bomb on the plane, and did he ever say that he had a weapon?
No. As far as I know, he never said he had a weapon, and no, he did not leave the bomb on board. Which begs the question, so where is the bomb?
Maybe it went with him. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I'm going to turn that down. That's awfully loud. We'll be back with more D.B. Cooper talk with Bruce A. Smith right after this.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Greetings and salutations, space travelers, from the Chronicles of the Unknown team.
What is Chronicles of the Unknown? I keep hearing about this thing.
It's a new paranormal reality TV show based right here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Follow our team as we uncover claims of activity on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. You can also follow us here every third Monday, where two members of our team will be available to answer your questions. We'll give you some equipment updates and some of our experiences on the road, right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with the UFOR. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Space Out Radio's news director for the SOR Space Wire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spaceoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Every month on Spaced Out Radio, we look into the deep and dark reports of cryptids roaming around the world with me, Rob Morphy, from Cryptopia.us. I would love it if you would join me and host Dave Scott as we delve into the most arcane stories and reports regarding creatures of the unknown. My job is to hunt down the details and bring the evidence forward to you. These aren't your regular Bigfoot stories I'm talking about either. You can find out more about crypto history at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to connect with us on Spaced Out Radio? Head to spacedoutradio.com to check out the latest shows, guests, and sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Space Travelers Club. You'll find all you need at spacedoutradio.com. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio. Tonight, a quick shout-out to a couple of new listeners in the Spaced Out Radio chat room, Ophidian and Tiffany. Thank you so much for trying out Spaced Out Radio for the first time tonight. Good to have you along for the ride. Tomorrow night on the show, we're going to get into the paranormal. We're going to talk about the Gansfeld experiment with Craig Weiler. We're going to get more into the paranormal as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. Hey, we want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world and taking part in the chat. Doctor and Cop, you guys are doing great. Keep the questions coming. We are right there. If you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell set the password for you SOR space travelers tonight. Sequestrate is your password. Sequestrate. Make sure you use it wisely if you are a Space Travelers member. If you want to follow us on social media, you could do so at Spaced Out Radio on Twitter, on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Give us a look on Instagram, Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, you can check out a plethora of features that we have for you, including listening to our great music from former Guns N' Roses lead guitarist Ron Bumblefoot Thal, and so much more. Remember, if you're listening in and you're participating on Twitter, use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio, so that way we can get your questions and comments. We are highly interactive on this show. Tonight we are talking D.B. Cooper, and during the break, because we are running out of time, we only got 1 hour left, Bruce A. Smith, our guest tonight, has agreed to come back on to fill us in on more D.B. Cooper on February 2nd, which will be a Thursday. You can check out Bruce's page. Go to Google, type in Mountain News, D.B. Cooper. There's a ton of information there. Highly suggest you check it out. Bruce, welcome back.
Thank you. I also encourage people to take a look at the book. I'd love to sell a few books to your listeners, but the books are a discernment, a distillation of everything that's at the Mountain News, which is basically an online news magazine. So you're going to get the raw stuff in the magazine. You're going to get all of the interviews, word for word, what people said and how they said it and when they said it and where they said it and stuff like that. But in terms of putting it into a larger context, what does it all mean? That's where the book comes into play. And you can get a digital copy or you can get the hard copy, the paperback, if you want to really read a book and have a piece of paper in your hand. So both of those are available at Amazon if anybody wants to buy them in their local bookstore. I have a deal with local retailers, but they're going to buy them through Amazon. So no one has them on a shelf, but they'll order it for you through Amazon, and that's how you can get the book. And so you can know everything that I know about D.B. Cooper, because everything I know is in the book. So
I want to get to a couple more audience questions, and then we got to continue on with Tina Mucklow, because we wanted to get heavily into that tonight. This one comes from Joe in the SOR Space Travelers Club. He is asking, what is the possibility that someone, maybe even a police or government official, found Cooper in the woods, buried him, and then took the money?
It's possible, particularly if the radar system was pretty good, and if law enforcement wasn't really on top of the situation. But I don't think that was the case. One of the FBI agents in Seattle who was active in the case, and one of the members who was really intimate, was in the inner circle of investigators in the Seattle office. His name is John Detlor. And John is still alive. He's a nice guy. And he's in all of the documentaries. He was in the History Channel documentary, and he was in National Geographic, and a number of different documentaries. And he's really clear. He said nobody thought Cooper was going to jump, and when we didn't find him on the plane, we were stunned. So that is the basic mindset of the FBI, and I think local law enforcement took their cues from the FBI after that. And the FBI was not real sure exactly where to look for D.B. Cooper, because they didn't really get the coordinates lined up from coordinating with the flight path and what Northwest Orient was telling them. At least this is the official story. Until about 11 o'clock Wednesday night, the night that Cooper jumped. So, which is one of the reasons why things got so delayed. It's by 11 o'clock at night, pretty much everybody is either gone to bed or is getting ready for Thanksgiving the next day, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, get back to me tomorrow when you have something more specific to tell me. not everybody went to bed. Ralph Himmelsbach is quite clear that he was up until 3 o'clock in the morning that night and then slept for a couple hours and then jumped in his airplane and was flying at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's a question of who was finding what and where. Did anybody find Cooper on the ground and then plug him and bury him and take the money? Maybe. There's a lot of rumors going around that Cooper, the most recent one, this is just a couple days old from the rumor mill, so this is hot off the press, so to speak, in Rumor Central, is that Cooper landed much further south. He landed where the money was found, and he landed in a homeless encampment. And they jumped him, took the money, tore him apart, buried him, and spent the money. How can you disprove that? It's like, really? Okay. Who knows?
Gail is asking, DNA analysis was not performed, but the part of it is that some of it was apparently taken to Langley for hair analysis. Langley is CIA. Why would the CIA be involved, and what analysis test did they do, if any?
I don't think the CIA was involved in the DNA analysis. It's my understanding that the FBI has a criminal lab and research facility in Langley. And so that when the FBI talks about Langley, they're talking about their own FBI facility in Langley. Is there a CIA operation there? Yeah. But I guess there's two different facilities. So the DNA analysis on the tie has been done, I believe, in the last 10 years, whereas the cigarette butts would be analyzed somewhere in the early 2000s. And there's conflicting reports on what, if anything, was done around 2002 and 2003. Ron and Pat Foreman, in their book, are real specific, and they say that they heard a TV news report announcing that the DNA on the cigarette butts had been determined, had been analyzed in 2002, and that D.B. Cooper's profile had been determined. And they were shocked when they went to FBI, to Larry Carr, in 2007 when they were writing their book, and he refuted that. He said, no, we never got any findings on the cigarette butts. And they said, but we heard it on TV. We heard it on Cairo radio. What happened? And they never got a satisfactory answer from that. So who did it? Who did the testing? Where was it done? I don't know. I have a chapter on DNA testing, and here's what I know about DNA testing by the FBI. Currently, or in that era, in the late 90s and early 2000s, DNA testing generally was done at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., which is also the home base of their primary national crime lab. However, that laboratory has been filled and is rife with incompetency and bad police work and bad scientific study. There was a congressional investigation of the National Crime Lab in, I believe, 1996. I spoke to one of the whistleblowers who was an FBI supervisor in the crime lab, and his 10 years' worth of whistleblowing and complaining was so loud and so shrill that he got the attention of the Department of Justice, who initiated the first investigation of the FBI's crime lab in 1996. And major reforms were supposedly instituted. The whistleblower told me, his name is Dr. Frederick Whitehouse, he told me that currently the FBI is still trying to sort out that mess, and that over 20,000 federal felony convictions are subject to be overturned because of FBI malfeasance in their national crime lab. That would include DNA testing. And one of the primary problems in the crime lab is that evidence is lost, and documentation and findings are not properly recorded or filed. That's what I know.
Very interesting indeed.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it sounds like there is one big cover-up going on. I mean, this sounds just too Keystone Cops-like, with all the errors in the investigation and people not talking to other people. You know, and the DNA. How do you drop the ball on DNA or take it to an FBI location and not process it or bring out the findings?
The problem is even worse. And even the simple stuff didn't get taken place. For instance, let's go back to Reno on the night in question. The agents that are actually on the plane retrieving the evidence are a hodgepodge of agents from the Las Vegas office and the Reno office. The guy in charge was the guy that was in charge in the Las Vegas office. So their special agent in charge, Red Campbell, had overall command, even though he was way out of his jurisdiction. And the local guys had to play second fiddle. They kept some of the evidence for themselves in Las Vegas. They sent some of the evidence to Seattle, and some of it went to Washington, D.C. So the FBI didn't even have all of the evidence that they retrieved from the airplane in one place. So how are you going to conduct a comprehensive, integrated investigation when all of your clues are spread out across the continent? And there is the cigarette butts in question never made it to Seattle. They were always kept in Las Vegas. The tie that is so important and is supposedly the source of the DNA, we now know was in Las Vegas for at least 4 days and didn't make it to Seattle until the following week. Where was it? Talk about broken chain of custody. Forget about it. This is a mess from the get-go. Now, back in the 70s, people weren't all that concerned about chain of custody and blah, blah, blah. You know, NCIS wasn't really, all that big a deal. And law enforcement really does not function in the way that Hollywood reveals it to be. It was a lot loosier-goosier. It was a lot more of a cowboy kind of thing. And in their defense, a lot of detectives would hold on to evidence from a crime scene as a tell, as they would call it. It was a tell. They wanted to keep a little something hidden from everybody, from either other detectives, certainly from the media, so that when they would have a suspect, you could say, "Oh, you're D.B. Cooper? What did you leave on the plane?" And if they said a tie, then they knew that the guy was legit because, yeah, we found the tie. And not everybody knows that. So, and it was only revealed when Russ Callum wrote his book that the tie only got to Seattle on the Monday after the skyjacking. That was in the 1980s. So for almost 20 years, everybody was in the dark about where that tie was. So that gives you an indication about how everybody was all kind of playing this. And the question would be why? And it gets to some fundamental issues. J. Edgar Hoover was the guy in charge of the FBI during the D.B. Cooper case. He died a short time after the actual skyjacking. But his policies were certainly in place. And one of the things that he did was he gave cash bonuses to agents who broke cases, particularly major cases. So all agents had an incentive not to share information, because if you shared information and you shared evidence, then you're going to have to share the money. And that expanded upon one FBI agent, one FBI office not wanting to share information and evidence with other FBI offices, because there was a pecking order. and you wanted fame and glory and promotion, and that meant more money and a bigger salary and more benefits, more prestige, better jobs, better working hours. You get ahead on the priority, and then you get your days off that you want, and you get to pick your vacation when you want. There's a lot of little incentives all down the pecking order about how the FBI functions as a law enforcement agency.
Do you think he was ex-Special Forces, Black Ops, or some spy? Because he was the type of guy, just looking at his description, that could be a million different people. But the way he prepared for this, the way he disappeared, his knowledge of the aircraft, really makes it intriguing as to what his background is.
Yes, exactly. I have a chapter on this in the book. It's the last chapter, and it's What Do I Think? Because this always comes up. And I think if I had to make a bet, the short answer is I don't know who D.B. Cooper is. Could he be Black Ops? Yeah, maybe. If I had to make a bet, if I had to put money on one scenario, here's my bet. He was a commando. He was in Special Forces in some kind of Black Ops kind of outfit, like ultra secret, okay? Like even more secret than Navy SEALs or Army Ranger or anything like that, or Delta Force. I'm talking a small little group of super trooper. Because what he knew was really, really classified information. It's also plausible to assume if he had these kinds of contacts, that he also, and this kind of information, that he would also have access to other guys like him. So if he wanted to round up a getaway team, an extraction team, he could do so. And they could fly in country from Vietnam with some ease, do the job, and then go back to Vietnam. He could have been in the boonies. He could have been in the jungles the next day. And this extraction team would have come in with state-of-the-art communications gear, and they could have been well-equipped, and they would have known exactly what they needed in terms of vehicles and clothing and medical supplies and tracking devices and stuff like that. Now remember, nothing has been found that was not found on the plane. So whatever went out the door with Cooper is still out there somewhere. And the question is, did it all get buried somewhere, or did it all get picked up by an extraction team? Did Cooper bring in tracking devices and put a tracking device in the briefcase with the bomb, and put another tracking device with the money, and another tracking device and the spare parachute in the reserve, and all of the other stuff in the bag that was 4 inches by 12 by 14, that bag? Or was everything tied together in one huge bundle, or things like that? And was it tied to him like with some kind of cord, like a tether? There's all different kinds of scenarios. And was there enough people out there waiting for him, looking for him, in four-wheel drives, ready to go, ready to rock and roll, not afraid of the rain, not afraid of the woods, not afraid of the dark, who have been well-trained to do this, and they had 13 hours to get their guy and get all the stuff and then get out of there? Is that what happened? I would, if I had to make a bet, that's where I would put my money. When I talk to guys who do this kind of work for a living, when I talk to guys in Special Forces, they say, Cooper was one of us. We're convinced. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And everything about the D.B. Cooper case is exactly how we do an operation. It was well planned, and it was well executed. Cooper never broke a sweat. He was with people that he threatened to kill with a bomb. He was with them for 5 hours, and he never broke a sweat, and he didn't allow anybody to freak out. His cabin control, the management of his hostages was perfect. They never even knew they were being skyjacked. That's how good he was. And he says, that's our kind of boy. That's what we train our people to do, to think like that and to act like that. Not necessarily steal a plane, but to have those kinds of skills so that you can pull it off just the way D.B. Cooper did. Now, the FBI doesn't want to talk about that at all. But
in your opinion, In your opinion, Bruce, did he survive the jump?
I think so. And I think there's a growing consensus, certainly in the parachute community, that the D.B. Cooper jump was survivable. Top proof of that, the top piece of corroboration on that, is all of the 14 copycats who jumped all made it successfully. Even people who didn't even know how to put a parachute on, even one guy who had never skydived before in his entire life. And in terms of weather and things like that, there was a guy who went on a plane, got to the ground, and he wasn't even wearing a coat. He was wearing a cowboy shirt, cowboy boots, and slacks. And he made it to the ground. He jumped in January in Colorado, and he made it to the ground okay. So it wasn't that tough.
I want to get to Tina Mucklow.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of story behind her. Have you ever tried to chat with her?
Yes, many times.
How open is she
and
to
with
this?
She's not open at all. I have contacted, looking for Tina and making contact for Tina, I would say has been my biggest undertaking in my research and in my investigation. I believe if we know what happened to Tina and during the skyjacking and afterwards, and what her life has been like, and how the events of her life came to be, I think we will know a lot more about the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. Here's what's going on. Right off the bat, Tina displayed skills in terms of managing Cooper and keeping him cool, calm, and collected that Florence clearly did not have. Florence was a basket case. She had the heebie-jeebies. She's shaking, rattling, and rolling. Okay? Tina steps in and makes an intervention to save her colleague who is falling apart at the seams. Tina spends 5 hours with Cooper and doesn't lose it. She keeps everything together to the point where the passengers thought Cooper was a Northwest Orient official and that Tina was just taking care of the boss. Tina afterwards, in interviews, and you can see the YouTube clips, she looks competent, comfortable in front of the camera, very compassionate, very concerned about the passenger's safety. When she talks about what it was like to be the flight attendant and knowing that there was a bomb on board and and her feelings towards the passengers and wanting to keep them safe, your heart goes out to this girl. Then something happens. A couple years later, Tina, the middle years after the skyjacking, are not clear to me or any other researchers, and Tina is not really helping us understand what was going on. Here's what I know. It is believed that Tina married a dispatcher of some kind from Northwest Orient, and that they left Minneapolis, where she was based, and apparently left Northwest Orient and moved to the California area, perhaps Sacramento or the Bay Area. She was married for a couple of years, and then they got divorced, and she moved in with her sister, who by then had married an FBI agent who was stationed in San Diego. And his name is Lee Dormuth, and I've spoken with Lee on multiple occasions, and he's very taciturn and has told me that he wants nothing to do with it. That's his quote, "I want nothing to do with it." He didn't even refer to a sister-in-law by name. He just called it. And I found that very dismissive and hard to believe that he would be so distant and detached from such a big event in his family's life. Something between 1976 and 1979 are the missing years. I have no idea what happened with Tina. I don't know how long she stayed in San Diego, and I don't know what happened. But I do know that by 1979, Tina is in a long-term care facility in Gresham, Oregon, a couple miles away from the Portland airport. Now, what she was Why she was hospitalized, I don't know. And why she was hospitalized in a community that was so close to where she had been skyjacked initially in 1971, that is even more confusing. And she leaves that facility shortly after the money is found at Tina Bar. Is there any kind of connection between Tina, the flight attendant, and Tina Bar where the money is found? I don't know. Is it just one of these wild coincidences? Maybe. It may be nothing more than something really just wacky like that. But we do know that shortly after she leaves Gresham, Oregon, her brother-in-law, Lee Dormith, and her sister, Jane, take her to Eugene, Oregon, to the Carmelite Convent in Eugene, and she spends the next 12 years there. And those nuns ain't saying nothing to nobody. And I thought I was lucky just to get out of there without getting arrested by the nuns. They were downright bitchy, all right, in a nice ecclesiastical kind of way. Another researcher has been to the convent. He told me, Galen has been to the convent, and he told me that the Mother Superior told him that Tina was there for 12 years, even though she really didn't fit in. What does that mean? I don't know. I tried asking. They didn't answer. At that point, Tina leaves the convent, and somewhere around 1991, apparently starts living in the Eugene, Oregon area, and is working in social services. And she gets more education, and she gets some kind of degree, and she's working as a counselor, or she's working clinically in social services, and is my understanding she's there to this day. I have seen her in Eugene. I've gone to her home. I've asked for an interview. She slammed the door not once, not twice, but 3 times in my face, and said, "You need to leave now." And I've contacted Lee twice, and he's walked away on me twice. Jane refuses to talk to me. I've talked to relatives of Tina's in Philadelphia, where she's from originally, and they gave me a cock and bull story, and it was just really wildly deceptive. And, you know, I don't know what their story and what their game is at all. I've talked to Tina's best friend from high school, who is now a psychiatrist. I asked her, Galen and I have both contacted this woman. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Eisenhower Turner, and Galen and I give her a nickname of Dr. E.T., and we have asked Dr. E.T. to join forces with us in making some kind of appropriate, sensitive outreach to Tina to get more information than just the outright silence that we got for years from Tina. Now, Tina broke her silence in 2012, and Dr. E.T. refused to work with us. I went to Dr. E.T.'s office, and she closed the door in my face. Tina broke her silence in 2012, and she gave an interview to a freelance journalist by the name of Paul Neville for the Eugene Weekly in a column called Happening People. And he interviewed her, and I've spoken with Paul, and he said that Tina was willing to talk with him, but she didn't want to talk about the D.B. Cooper case at all, but she was willing to talk about her life, and so she did. I needed a sip of tea here. And what they talked about was the convent, and they talked about flying with Northwest Orient. And Tina said that she worked with Northwest Orient until 1981 and flew routes primarily to the Orient. And that doesn't jive with any other information that I have on Tina. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if she lied or it's the truth and everything else is deceptive. I don't know what that all means. Then Tina appeared and gave a lengthy interview in the History Channel documentary that aired last July. And she gave a very credible performance. Is it legit? I guess so. I have no reason to doubt it. I just don't know how it adds up with everything else I know about Tina. I've asked the History Channel, what did you say to get Tina to appear on camera? And they just said we were nice. And we explained what we were doing, and she agreed to appear. And, you know, and sometimes I'm just left to say, well, maybe your nice is nicer than my nice, because I didn't get very far with anybody in the Tina Mucklow family. So what can I say? I received along the way some disturbing information about Tina that I've not been able to corroborate, but I hear the same story quite a few times. Russ Callum, in his book, says that he interviewed Tina by phone when she was in the convent, and they were talking about the D.B. Cooper case and what she remembers, and Russ Callum describes her memory and her cognitive abilities as being significantly impaired, to the point where he said, if we ever catch Cooper, we won't be able to call Tina as a witness because her mind is shot. Similar stories I got from Bill Radachek, who told me that he worked with an FBI agent by the name of Richard Tusaw, who also wrote a book on the Cooper case, and that Tusaw interviewed Tina in the convent, and he too thought Tina was mentally impaired. And Radachek told me that Tusaw told him that it was as if Tina's mind had been wiped clean like a whiteboard. And that's what I got from Bill Radachek. Now, that's pretty disturbing stuff. But on camera, in the History Channel, she looks fine. So I'm just telling you what I know. And things are not adding up, and Tina is not talking to me. So the best that I can do is present what I've got, acknowledging that there's plenty of missing gaps. And I really don't know what's going on. Now, there's wild speculation. Now, if we want to go a little further down the rabbit hole, we now know that the crew are telling a little different story than the passengers of what life was like on the plane during the skyjacking. And it's my belief, based upon those discrepancies, that Northwest Orient began to prompt and coach the crew in terms of what stories to tell when they got on the ground, to put Northwest Orient in the best possible public light, to preserve the brand, to preserve public confidence in Northwest Orient. So the crew stressed safety, passenger awareness, management of the skyjacker, isolating him, making all the passengers move forward, changing seats, keeping them away from the skyjacker, not letting people use bathrooms except for in the front of the plane and things like that. And what the passengers are telling me is that things were very different. They could walk anywhere they wanted to. They could sit anywhere they wanted to. The crew only moved them forward for landing. And that the real issue is that somebody in the middle of the plane got really drunk and got really rowdy, and even Cooper was making verbal interventions to shut the guy up. And it took all of the crew's effort to get this guy back in his seat and calm down. So it was chaotic from passengers' point of view. We also know from the passengers that things played out differently when the plane was on the ground than what the official story is. We now know that an FBI agent got on the plane. And we know that because one of the passengers told me that. The passenger's name is Larry Feingold. Larry Feingold is now of an advanced age, but he's still alive and still hale and hearty. But in 1971, he was the U.S. Assistant District Attorney for Seattle. And he was sitting in row 6. And when the plane landed, he saw an FBI agent get on board the plane. And he knew the guy from the courts. And the agent knew him and walked up to him and said, The skyjacker's on board. I'll tell you more. I'll get back to you in a minute, and walk down. Whether this agent was armed or not, or whether he was there on official orders, or whether he was acting on his own behalf, we don't know. But we do know, I take Larry Feingold at his word. And the general scenario and of what was happening in the forward part of the plane is supported by other passengers on board. That two men, I heard from several passengers that several men came on board right off the bat. And that the crew then Tina met them at the front of the airport, at the front of the plane, and then there was an exchange of money and money bags at that, and then she brought the money back to Cooper and stuff like that. So the general outline of Larry Feingold's story is supported by other people. Now, speculation is this. If Northwest Orient was telling people, we want you to tell a few white lies, just to keep things on an even keel, was there more than that? There is now other speculation that the military got involved. Since it was top secret military information about how to jump out of a 727 successfully, did national security people also get involved and tell people on board, tell the crew, don't say nothing to nobody? And did all of this get mixed up and people started being intimidated or coerced or pressured into a silence or into supporting a company story, the party line? And over time, was there internal friction among the crew and between the crew and Northwest Orient and between the crew and the FBI and between the crew, the FBI, Northwest Orient, and military intelligence and national security? You have a lot of different players with different agendas who may have been pressuring the principles of the case in different ways for different reasons. And Tina may have just been pulled apart in a lot of different ways. And maybe all of the crew were pulled apart psychologically in a lot of different ways. And now they don't want to say nothing to nobody, particularly a guy like me who's asking way too many questions. So that is a lengthy explanation of how Tina may have become the Tina that I know.
It just sounds so contrived and so rigged. It really does.
To me, I think there were some overarching pressures and agendas, like keep people safe, keep the brand, the Northwest Orient brand, in the public's eye, keep it pure and untarnished. I think there were guiding principles. My sense is that they were kind of playing things by ear and kind of improvising as they went along.
What about the reaction of the pilots? Are the pilots still alive, and do they talk about it at all, or due to maybe company protocol, were they told to go quiet as well?
Here's what I know. The captain who was in charge, William Scotty passed away in 1994 of cancer, so he's long gone. Bill Radachek, I spoke at length. I was on the phone with him for 70 minutes back in 2009, and ever since then he's not talking to anybody. But he talked at length to the History Channel. That's the first time I've ever seen him speak publicly since I spoke to him in 2009. And the flight engineer is Andy Anderson, and he spoke very little to very few people. He's not been responsive to me in my inquiries, and I do not know if he's still alive. I mailed him a copy of my book to the last address I had for him, and it just came back to me. The post office just delivered it a couple weeks ago. So I don't know if he's still with us or if he's passed on. So that's what I know. Radachek is by far the most outspoken, has been historically. When the crew was debriefed by the FBI, those summary sheets of those debriefings in Reno are now part of the public record, and they've been released through various places, I believe, through either theft from FBI files or hacking or both. Nevertheless, they are in the public domain at this point, and I don't know what the FBI is going to do about that. And if anybody wants to go see them, they can go check the vault at the D.B. Cooper Forum, which is an online chat room, and you can see the debriefing report summaries from Reno. And it's very revealing about who says what. Captain Scott said very, very little, even to the FBI that night, and he was very much a company man. He publicly, in YouTube clips, he said, "I've told the FBI everything that needed to be told. The company has asked me not to say anything more to the public until further notice, and I'm going to follow their requests." And that's it. That's basically all he's ever said publicly. His report in the summary is very brief. It's less than a page. Radicek's summary report from Reno is, in contrast, is probably a dozen pages. And Andy Anderson's basically his pages are 5 or 6 pages, and basically his information is comparable to what Radicek was saying. So the two of them corroborate each other. And that's what we know. Radicek has been in lots of videos. He's been in lots of documentaries. He's been fairly public about things. He's been fairly visible. So.
I got a question coming from Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio. This one comes from God of Thunder. He is asking, could they have not have traced the serial numbers on the cash to see if the money that washed up was truly from the D.B. Cooper case?
They did, and they confirmed it. The money that was found on the beach is confirmed definitively to be D.B. Cooper money. And that was done in 1980.
So before they handed the money off to him, they must have written down all the serial numbers then, or took photographs of them.
Yes, everything was microfiched. When the FBI began to stockpile large caches of money all over the country, they certainly recorded all of the serial numbers. So nothing had to be done at the last minute. Everything was ready to go.
Why do you think, if you believe that he made it, that he just went absolutely silent, that it was like a one-and-done crime just to see if he could do it? Or do you think that he went silent for this long with no deathbed convention or confession or anything along those lines? Why do you think, in the end, he did it?
Well, I'll tell you what one of the Special Forces guys told me. He says, "We're not flabby and we're not gabby." And he said anybody that's in Special Forces, anybody who does covert operations, never talks about it. And if you ever feel a need to talk about it, then you're not allowed into that unit, and you never go on those missions. And he said, you also have to understand the military culture. He said, we are a tribe unto ourselves. We live apart from society. We live outside of the world. We live in military enclaves. We're either on base or we live off base, surrounded by others of our kind, birds of a feather, flocking together. And our wives, we don't marry women who ask questions about what we do. And if you meet a girl who's asking too many questions, you don't marry her, and you don't go out on any more dates. And you only go out with women who can play, who know what the rules are. And it's the same way in the mafia. Nobody marries anybody in the mob without knowing what the rules are, even if they're never stated. If you don't know the rules, then you're not on a date. No one asks you out on a date. It's the same way in military intelligence. And one special operative told me, he says, at its core, military intelligence and special operations is basically a family business. It's who you know. Sons and daughters of people who are known to the unit, who are known to the commanders, who are known to operations. They can see somebody coming up when they're growing up, and they're selected. They get tapped along the way. You want to join us now that you're 21? You want to join us? We see that you are doing this and you're doing that. We could use a guy like you. Your father was a good man. Your mother was a good woman. You want to be part of it? It's that kind of thing. In general, there are those aspects. Are there other dynamics at work in special operations and covert operations? Yes, I'm sure there are. Okay, but that's how it was explained to me by a couple individuals.
A gentleman named Dwayne Weber, according to God of Thunder at #SpaceOutRadio, made a deathbed confession to his wife saying he was Cooper. Do you believe this?
No. He did. He said he was Dan Cooper. There's no corroboration on that. But his wife is quite a character, and she's like the godmother of the D.B. Cooper investigation. She is active in every chat room. She knows everybody involved in all aspects of the case. She has talked to Tina. When I showed up at Lee Dormant's doorstep, Joe had already called him. Joe, the wife, Joe Weber, had already spoken to Lee and Jane, warning them that I was coming. And Lee told me that his wife was, quote, camped out on the phone with that Joe Weber woman last night talking about you. So Joe Weber is quite a force. He's a force of nature. But is her former husband D.B. Cooper? I don't think so. No. There's no corroborating evidence that suggests otherwise, other than the so-called confession that no one else heard.
We only have about 7 minutes left with you. Do you believe that there was anything tied to MK Ultra with this? Because at that time, we know the CIA and the FBI, as well as the military, was playing around with MK Ultra.
And for those that are not unfamiliar with MK Ultra, in the shorthand, MK Ultra is the military's program of training mind over matter warriors. And if you've ever seen the movies The Manchurian Candidate, they go into MK Ultra like processes where a mind can be controlled. And the question is, why would you control somebody's mind? And so MK Ultra had many, many different kinds of programs to achieve certain kinds of effects. And if you've seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, that is a practical application, military application of mind over matter techniques. For instance, if you're a soldier, if you were trained to heal yourself and you were wounded in battle, could you heal yourself faster and get back onto the battlefield faster with mind over matter techniques? And so there's been a lot of research into this, and the question is, the answer is yes, the military is doing this kind of stuff. And MK Ultra has been around for a very long time, decades. And so there has been lots of rumors that MK Ultra may have been used to silence people, like crew members. Is that why Tina doesn't want to talk to me? And her family slamming doors, and she's slamming doors, and Florence has got the heebie-jeebies and won't talk to anybody, and why Scotty wouldn't talk to anybody, and why Andy Anderson wouldn't talk to anybody. Have they been conditioned to not talk? And Russ Callum, in his book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, presents some of the most disturbing information. Russ Callum wrote the book with another federal officer by the name of Bernie Rhodes, and Bernie Rhodes interviewed the FBI agents that were responsible for the evidence retrieval in Reno. And they write in their book that when Bernie was interviewing these guys, their minds were affected in a way as if they were responding to some strange post-hypnotic suggestion. And those aren't my words. Those are Bernie's words. That's what he wrote in the book. And he went on to say that when they talked to other FBI agents that were involved, either in security, perimeter search, things like that, that when they were discussing the events of that night, their memories were pretty hazy. And Bernie and Russ make the point that how could trained professional law enforcement agents of the FBI have memories so fuzzy about the biggest case of their careers? How could they get so much information wrong? And it got so bad that the guys who supposedly found the tie and are documented as retrieving the tie in Reno in federal records, where they say they found it and where they found it and what they did with it, when Bernie Rhodes interviewed them in 1980, so about 15 years after, in 1985 I think was the interview, so 15 years later, none of the people that Bernie talked to ever remember seeing the tie or doing anything with the tie, and they have no memory of anyone seeing the tie or doing anything with it. And it was as if the question of the time was just some big blank spot in their collective memory banks. So it's like, how does that happen? Are they all lying? Are they covering something up? Or have their minds been scrubbed? I don't know. But just because I don't know, and because no one's talking about it, doesn't make it go away. And I think these are the kinds of questions that continue to fuel the D.B. Cooper case, even though it's 45 years old, and the FBI has officially closed the case. It ain't dead, and as it turns out, it ain't going away. If anything, it's been revived, because I just sent a Freedom of Information request to James Comey, saying, now that you have closed the case, I would like to have access to this file and that file and yada yada, and to talk about these things and to go digging into this stuff as a historical researcher. And I haven't heard back yet, but that's where it's at right now. So these questions aren't going away. I'm not going away. And I think folks like your listeners, a lot of people want some answers. And so we're going to keep digging.
We're down to about 2 minutes left. Once again, I would absolutely love it if you could tell people about your books, where they can get them, when the next edition is coming out again.
Yeah, you can get my book, D.B. Cooper and the FBI, a case study of America's only unsolved skyjacking. You can get either a digital copy or a hard paper copy from Amazon, and just go there and they'll print it up for you and ship it out to you. I'm at the Mountain News, and if you want to contact me directly, you want to send me some emails, you got some questions, you want to make some comments, you can find all my contact information at the Mountain News in the section called Contact. And or you can, Dave, I'll give Dave, if anybody calls you, and if it seems appropriate, you want to give out my email address, be my guest.
I've got people asking about autographed copies. Do you do autographed copies?
You bet. If anybody wants an autographed copy, they're going to have to send me $25, and I will autograph a copy and send it out to whatever address, and you give it to me. So if you got to mail it to me, and you have to get my mailing address, you're going to have to. I don't feel comfortable giving it out over the air right now, but I'll give it to you, Dave, and people will have to send me some money. And then they'll get the book.
Not a problem, my friend. Not a problem. Bruce A. Smith, thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to get you to hold on for just a couple of seconds here, because I got to wrap this thing up. If you're listening in on the Spaced Out Radio side, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses, playing right now. He brings us in and brings us out of every show, as he is our resident guitar god and the official music of Spaced Out Radio. Tomorrow night on the show, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, Craig Weiler will join us. We're going to talk paranormal and a lot about the Gansfeld experiment. Gansfeld experiment. We want to thank everyone participating in the chat rooms tonight. You made this show so much fun. And on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. It's good to have you all along for the ride. Remember, you can listen to this show and others on our archive sections, on YouTube at Spaced Out Radio Show, on TuneIn, Spaced Out Radio, on iTunes, Spaced Out Radio Show. What I ask, my friends, as we're 25,000 strong per night right now, tell a friend. Let's grow this baby together. I want to take it mainstream. I need your help. Tell a friend. Spread it on social media. Take it to that next level, listeners. I'm relying on you to do that, as I'm doing it all on this end to try and bring you a pretty damn good topic every night. I think we hit the nail on the head with an A1 show tonight. Thank you, Bruce, for doing that. Remember, come back tomorrow night. We will be here, and we will be rocking. Thank you so much for being with us, and take care.
Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching.